No, you're not in Bizarro World. The title of the video is accurate. Very first Slipknot album from 1999. We're going to talk about it. It's a shock, I'm sure, considering 4 years ago I made a video that was all about how I disliked Slipknot. All about how I felt that they were not a very good band. It was one of the very first videos that I ever posted. And it definitely garnered a response. So why 4 years later do I go back to this? Or really, probably the better question is, why did I never do this in the first place? Well, 4 years is a hell of a long time to, get a little more mature, I guess, especially in what I do. And now I finally feel that I have the capability, especially considering we will be talking about the new album, which comes out here in a couple of days. So, what better way to kind of rectify for past wrongs but then to talk about the 4 previous ones before we talk about the 5th. That's right, it's a marathon day, and we have to start at the beginning. So Slipknot was a band that, well, in 1999 essentially took everybody by surprise. Took metal by storm. And I do have to say metal and radio and everything. The one thing I'm going to say about their self-titled debut is that it perfectly described what heavy music kind of was in America in 1999. Whenever it came to what was on the radio, whenever it came to the revolution that was kind of upon music in the form of nu metal, Slipknot was kind of the punctuation mark. It was the period at the end of the sentence, the accentuation point. You had a lot of bands that came through and that were starting off their careers on a very high note, doing very different things. Whether they punctuated it through heavy guitars that didn't necessarily have to impress all of that much in the soloing department, it wasn't necessarily like thrash metal, or whether it was the whole rap metal idea that bands such as Limp Bizkit were really, taking hold and taking charge with. This was a scene that was really punctuating what nu metal was all about, what metal in the latter part of the 1990s in America was being defined as. And it was this idea of this music that was also on the radio. These are bands that were really taking everything by storm. Ozfest was an idea that was ramping up in popularity. There was a desire for heaviness. There was a desire for legitimate heaviness. The time of alternative rock was done. The very first Slipknot song I ever heard was Wait and Bleed off of this disc, and immediately I took notice. In fact, I remember a long, long time ago, whenever this song first debuted, I sent a mixtape to a friend of mine, someone who I'm still in contact with to this day. And I remember writing to her in the liner notes of the mixtape, which was something that I did, saying, "Do not be surprised if this band is the next big thing." And sure enough, they are. Sure enough, they were, should I say. This is an album that went double platinum. And it did so kind of as a complete and utter shock, as a surprise. This is not an album you would expect to go double platinum, because whenever you listen to it, at face value, it does have a lot of alluring factors to it, but it also has a lot of factors that are not. This is not necessarily one of those accessible albums to everybody, which is the reason why Slipknot fans have a reputation of feeling as though they're listening to something that's really all of that, heavier than, a lot of what a lot of other people are listening to. And in a way, they are actually kind of right. If you consider conventional music society these days and what they listen to, Slipknot is a whole hell of a lot more heavy than what most of them listen to. Is it the heaviest thing out there? Not by a long shot. There are some moments where this band really showcases on their self-titled debut that they had songwriting chops, that they had ability, that they really knew how to kind of write in the style that was going on during the latter part of the 90s, but not necessarily as a reason to conform to what was going on at that time frame, but mainly as a way to try to attempt to innovate. There were ideas here that involved rap metal. There were ideas that involved a little bit of thrash, that involved a little bit of death metal, that involved a little bit of industrial. There's a little bit of everything here. And with 9 members, you would kind of expect and hope for a bit of a wide and diverse, album. This is something that doesn't always feel that way, though. I think one of the main reasons why Slipknot immediately started to fall off of my radar as a band that I was going to get into is because after listening to the album, I didn't feel all of that changed. I wasn't exactly as enthralled as I was after listening to, say, an album such as The Sickness by Disturbed, which is one of what I consider to be a quintessential nu metal release. All nu metal had some similar problems. They were all songs that definitely seemed to tailor themselves one after the next. There were albums that definitely felt like they had a bit of an oomph factor behind them. Follow the Leader by Korn is another great example. But in reality, there's definitely something that could be said about, maybe a lacking of diversity. Either that or a lacking of feel of genuine diversity. Everything seems to stick within a similar, tempo range or a similar tone, as opposed to exploring all of the different facets of sound. This is not an album that really falls victim to that trap all of that much, considering they do explore a lot of different sounds, but they also explore those sounds kind of within that same tempo. There's a darkness that kind of clouds this album a little bit, and it's one where it's kind of finding the real balance between the rap metal side, the industrial side, and the one that wants to be extreme metal. But by and large, it does qualify as extreme metal. This is definitely also an album that's shrouded by darkness by the fact that it does have a very black tone to it. And I don't mean black metal, I don't mean black person, I mean black as in it's a synonym for dark. There's definitely kind of a basement with a dim lit, electrical bulb. It was something that you would see perhaps out of a serial killer movie, or something that perhaps you would read whenever you would read about a serial killer or a fucked up, murder mystery. It's one of those depraved feelings, and it's one that is constantly exhibited on this album, and it's one that's actually portrayed rather well. There's also an evident idea of madness that comes across. Whenever I hear the rap portions, I don't think of rap. I actually think of an individual who's going through thoughts so quickly because they're under stress, they're in duress, or they're in the process of being attacked or attacking somebody, all depending on the role that you really want to prescribe for your particular interpretation. And it's just thoughts that are flowing, consistently flowing. There are moments on this album where there is some genius. Purity is actually one keynote example. This is the song that actually I come back to the most. I think it's something to do with the fact that it feels the most different on this album. It's the one that stands out a lot. There are other songs that feel like bona fide noise, that really don't go anywhere, they don't really accomplish much. It's just almost like trying to set a scene or something like that, and it doesn't exactly work very well. On an album that sold 2 million records, you don't necessarily think of something like that as being a presence. Purity also gives me this sensation because it feels like a complete song. It feels like the best track that was written. And the vocals in the chorus remind me a bit of like this weird amalgamation of the Deftones and Fear Factory. The Fear Factory tone you can immediately pick up on the minute you hear the tonality of it, but something says Deftones as well. Maybe it's the fact that there's a bit of a similar tone. I can kind of hear Chino doing it from the Deftones instead of Corey Taylor. But all in all, this is a great track. This is an album that posts just a couple of them. There are a lot of others that I feel that I could listen to half of it, get the gist of it, and move on. There's a lot of tracks that don't necessarily illuminate themselves and stand out. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger on this album. The intensity, the fury, is one of the things that this album is best known for. It's what makes these guys a bit controversial, considering they're being widely consumed. It's a group that definitely had a bullseye on their chests from the moment that they started to rise, meteorically to the top of the forefront of this new aggressive style of metal known as nu metal. But really, in consideration to other things that are out there, this is an album that on the creepiness scale only hits about a 4 or a 5. As far as the debut is concerned, as far as Slipknot are concerned, this album is okay. They showed their abilities. They showed their capabilities. But they also showed that they were a band that had just self-produced a debut album a couple years before it, had been shopping around, and really were able to shock the world with a shock factor style album. that showed a band that was still kind of in its infancy, that still had a lot of ability that was untapped, that still needed some time together in order to really help construct their sound and really refine it. Something that future albums aim to really attempt to do. But whenever you consider the time frame, 15 years ago, in a musical time capsule here in America, you start to recognize just why this album did what it did. It took everybody by surprise, and that's why it took everybody by storm. At a time frame where heavy music was starting to really take its hold back, to a time where you either listen to heavy music or you listen to bubblegum shit pop, well, there you have it. This is almost like reaching the top of the mountain. It was almost like going and watching the rise of the next baseball or sports superstar. Or these days, it was almost like seeing the winner of heaviness American Idol whenever it came to the nu metal department. In the game of one-upsmanship that was going on within these bands, with each one coming and bringing something new to the table, Slipknot was the band that brought unadulterated extreme metal tendencies to the table. And that's why they're remembered. That's why they're loved. And that's why so many of these records were consumed. For me, it's alright. For you, I'm sure, if you're viewing this, you love it. And you're part of the reason why these guys are huge. Even if you're a newer fan, somebody who just discovered them last week, you're a reason why. Because this is a band that kind of almost has the importance in music in the past 15 years as a Metallica. They're a band that's on everybody's lips, and just about everybody knows about them. Those of you who follow extreme metal and follow thrash metal, have been metalheads for a long time, are probably looking at me and saying, fuck you. But stand back and look and think. And it's a harsh reality that you have to accept. So what happens whenever a couple years pass and Slipknot enters into that sophomore album? In reality, they're junior, but whenever it comes to the one that you can find at a record store, because Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat, you can't. It was limited to 1,000 copies. Was there be a sophomore slump? Or would they make those leaps and bounds in songwriting and as a band to really craft something for the ages?